You just tell us when we're live. And anybody who's here, we are going to be streaming live to YouTube. So if you don't want to be on camera, you can just turn your camera off and you won't be on the screen. All righty, perfect. So let me just dig into here. So everybody who may not know me, I'm one of the co-founders of Nocode North, and are the co-founders of Penny Olorenshaw and Maggie Monceau, who will be doing the stream and covering all the directing and camera stuff today. Nocode North is a Canadian community of no-code and Webflow enthusiasts, and we hold workshops, panels, and hangouts every Friday here in our gather space, and as well as monthly, we have showcases on YouTube that highlight Canadian talent, and we share it with the rest of the world. And next week, we have a showcase highlighting one of our talented people from Vancouver, Nancy Pang. Now, today, as everybody knows, we're going to be discussing the new Webflow superpower of components. And so just first, I would love to introduce our wonderful panel. First, we have Alessia Sannazzaro. Sannazzaro is the co-founder and managing director of Code and Wander. She and her team empower clients by blending code and no-code tools, earning the agency a spot as a Webflow Premium Partner. She shares her expertise through YouTube, speaking at events, podcasts, live stream, and the Webflow Conference. And she will be speaking again this year at the Webflow Conference London session, Tips for Landing and Expanding Your Client Roster with Joseph Barry and Emily Lonetto. Hal Zeitlen is the owner of Candidleap Agency, focuses on design systems and component-first Webflow builds. He also created Form Connector, an app in the Webflow marketplace that seamlessly links Webflow forms to various destinations and software tools like Salesforce, Google Sheets, and Airtable, simplifying submissions and streamlining form management. And Kenneth Yu, a seasoned developer and leader with 17 plus years in technology and creative industries as principal developer at Specter Studio. He leads Webflow development and provides technical consultation for global agencies and design teams. His expertise spans technical leadership, creative direction, and brand strategy, honed through diverse leadership roles across creative services, communications, and account management. Thank you so much for everyone, our panel, for being here. I think the discussion is because it's kind of such a new thing. These components and slots and shared libraries, and I'm not sure everybody's like had as much time to really dig into them. So I'm curious, show of hands or the little emojis or whatever, who actually has had any time to take a look at the components and stuff. Just really quickly with your little, anybody? Yeah. Excellent. I'm not really sure how to start this, to be honest. I wasn't like sure how to get started. Maybe Alessia, you can tell us how you kind of got into like thinking about components and whatnot, because I think you've got a whole system going, and I'm going to share the link for that for people. So if you can start us off, maybe.
Sure. I mean, the system is work in progress, like always. So this is the link that you're going to share. It's a bit of a sneak peek of what I've been working on. But yeah, components. So it's kind of, I mean, the concept of components is not new to the development space, but it's fairly newish to the Webflow space, maybe. We all remember how once upon a time, components were more like symbols, like Figma used to be, and symbols. And they were great for when you had to maintain kind of a certain element the same across the whole site. So you created a symbol to make sure that it's consistent. And then those kind of evolved into, sometimes you might want to have a symbol that changes slightly. Maybe it has different content or a different text or image. So that's when Webflow introduced props. So you could link a specific element inside of the component so that it could be switched out, and you can add different copy or different images. And it's like you just see the evolution of components in Webflow, and now what you can do with component slots and the class attribute, it kind of opens up loads more opportunities. So we kind of saw the whole evolution in the past, I don't know, how long has it been? Like a year or so, not even that long, of how components kind of started with this like simple, oh, let's keep it consistent, the same element, same content and styling across the whole site. And now you can customize it in lots of different ways. So I don't know if anyone else has anything to add, Kenneth and Hal.
I'll share. So a while back, we did some work with a much bigger agency that works with some of the biggest companies in SaaS, and I got in their email email automation, and this guy was selling like Lego block builds on headless, like contentful stuff, things like that. And this email flow was so compelling, where he's like, we're going to build you these Lego blocks and your marketing team's going to crush it. And we're doing it with this headless software. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is like a massive, really well-established agency selling like component first builds. Now, it wasn't for Webflow, but that's when I was like, okay, like how can I not be a commodity in my business? And that was when I started saying, okay, I need to move my business and the way we work to be like this other agency. And that was before all these features came out, as Alessia, as you were saying. So it's pretty much like 1 year. And so, Webflow is really focusing on building these component features, these design system features. And I feel this is the opportunity for us to really provide value, empower marketing teams, but also as more and more service providers enter the space, still not be a commodity and really make an impact. So I feel it's, if we all want to succeed in the coming year and beyond, like learning how to use components properly and all the gotchas and systems is really critical. And I think a big part of it, just to close up, is it's about building things that clients can own without you. Maybe they want to keep you around to build more components or maintain it or do consulting, but like my business, we really don't sell retainers that hard. Like they kind of sell themselves if they need to, but my approach is like, yeah, like after we build this, you might not need us anymore. I know for some agencies that's like kind of scary to say, and that sounds silly, but really, if you're doing components right and they're not scaling their site a ton, they don't need to be paying for that many hours after launch.
And is there, I mean, there's also the added sorry, Kenneth, there's also the added complexity, I guess, that even if you're not upselling them on a continuous thing, there still is that complexity that it's a bit more than most people are going to handle. Or like you said, if they want more designed, then they're going to come back to you because you kind of provided them this system that, you're taking care of them and their needs and whatnot. And so it's building that kind of long-term relationship out. Is that kind of how you see that, Hal?
Yeah, I'm just kind of chilling. Like, look, at the end, here's how we price for, like, we're called maintenance and scale plans. And you'll know if you need and want to work with us still. And, at the end, they're like, wow. Also, the thing with components right now, Webflow will launch more features. We are writing a lot of CSS and some coding and stuff. And honestly, most agencies and freelancers like aren't at a place yet where they know how to fully leverage these properties and build in different states. I can show some examples later of how we do that. So I think too, like right now, until Webflow like builds it more into the platform, there is also sort of a catch that, you need to work with a service provider that knows how to write the CSS and the JavaScript needed inside these components to really make them work. So it's both a pro that we're doing it, but also for companies buying us, they should also understand that this is not, you can't go on Upwork and hire a random Webflow developer to keep building on these systems. And so I'm right now working with my team on building out a course and some content for our own recruiting and training, but also just to help people who are like intermediate developers become more advanced here, because I don't see really anything right now helping to fill that gap besides Timothy Ricks. Shout out to Tricks. Let's go.
Kenneth?
Yeah, I was gonna say I couldn't agree more with what both of them are saying. I think there's a huge opportunity right now for us as Webflow experts. I think components has really aligned the development side to how really how designers have been using Figma. We're talking about like larger teams here, and I think historically we didn't have the technology to do that. So kind of like Alessia was saying back when we were dealing with symbols before we had props and all that stuff. And I think upcoming we can probably expect Webflow to dive further into that, right, with page building. I'm guessing here, but maybe they'll do something similar to variants in Figma, where a components you can have. And I think again, Timothy Ricks has been doing it his own way with Lumos. So I think we're at this point right now. I think there's a lot of opportunities, and I'll share, kind of following Hal's lead here. I had a client. We were doing a very large enterprise build right around the time when we heard about this new build mode with components and props and all that stuff. We were about 25% done the project at the time using non-components, and they decided to enable that it was worth their time to restart the project because they see the value in how it empowers their marketing team. So right now their entire team is extremely excited about it, and all that to say, I think if you're a Webflow developer looking to kind of what's the next season for you, if I think some of us can really get bogged down with the hourly and maybe clients treating us like commodity, to Hal's point. I can really see components being one of the paths that takes us to earlier in the conversation, really, right, where we're involved with a discussion about design systems and how they can organize the way that they build, and really positioning ourselves as not just that last mile delivery person, right? That we're part of that discussion. We're introducing our thoughts even when they're designing. So there's just so much value in there, and I'm very excited for the new page build modes.
That's a great segue into, I think, is one of the first steps, like, you need some sort of framework design system to make components work. Is there a particular framework that you've adopted or you think works best, or does it really matter? Anyone?
I mean, I'm trying to develop my own. I know that there's lots of class naming frameworks out there. They're all like building frameworks like Mast and Client First and Loomis and so on. Honestly, I always took inspirations from them, but I never followed any of them. I always created my own. I don't know whether it's each developer has like their own way of building and kind of wants to improve their own way. But that kind of led me to start thinking how we build as an agency. So all of us as Webflow developers, and not only following a class naming system, but also the structure of it. So that's what kind of led me thinking, oh, can we create a whole framework just with components? And that's where blocks, or what I'm trying to build, the framework came out, where it's maybe a little bit different from client components, where you have a whole section that they can just like drag and drop and create a whole page. It's more a developer oriented framework with components. Just another way of building, because I always find there's no one fits all, and the more ways we have, the more we can iterate and expand and experiment with the whole community, and more people will have more ideas that they can add into the community, and it sparks more ways of doing things rather than all following one way.
I totally, like, I cannot be more aggressive about, if you don't have a really legit design system, your components will not work, because it's the Lego blocks. And if you don't have a solid design system, and let's stop, like, it's so easy to be like, yes, we do design systems. And it's like, I've been doing web stuff for over 5 years now. And like, I'm now just figuring out this last year how to actually do it. And I think there's a huge risk for Webflow developers to be, let's do this without having either in-house resources and expertise around design and design systems, or having a partner. Like right now for clients for the last year, we're charging all of them to take their Figmas and refactor them so they have a proper design system. Like no one's coming with us with this ready to go. We work with a lot of designers, they don't even know it. So I would say first thing, Jeremy, yes, like design systems are huge, because otherwise the Lego blocks aren't going to look consistent and part of a unified like universe. The padding might be off, the spacing might be off. And so that's, I can show later, sort of like with one of our clients, sort of the framework and levels of hierarchy that we use. But Kenneth, like, how are you, like, do you have design resources in-house? Like, how are you solving that problem? Or do you just disagree with me that, like, if you're a professional developer, you can figure it out?
No, never. I've learned to never disagree with Hal. No, for me, I'm more of a solo team per se. Like I have some design partners that I work with, but to your point, I agree with you. I think all the clients, big and small, rarely anyone is coming to me with like a full-blown design system all mapped out. And in this project that I mentioned earlier, we actually had to reverse engineer it. So now the clients actually increase the scope of the project to essentially pay me to help them reverse engineer that. And so that's kind of what I mean is in our position with the upcoming releases that we're all expecting in Webflow Conf, it truly empowers us in a position that, you know, you can really, you know, to put it bluntly, make more money through components, through design system. But first, I think we need to first understand what a design system is. I think sometimes, to your point, like some people are just, oh yeah, we do design system, and people are thinking in terms of, oh, I know how to do buttons, I know how to do, you know, CTAs and things of that nature. But it's so much more than that. And just to piggyback on Alessia's earlier point, I have found in my building lately that I have built components for myself to build quicker. And then I have components that are for the clients to use. So the new folder that they've enabled lately was really helpful, because I have like a little folder for myself at the bottom, and then the rest are for the clients. And but maybe that's a bit too technical. Love to hear your thoughts on that later.
Kenneth, you have a thing like a roadmap, a little bit of your like design system. Can you share that with us?
Oh, sure. Alessia has
little bit of it.
Much better. Yeah, she has a much better one, but I have to, of course,
I want to see yours as well.
Really, honestly, it's a very similar idea to what you're doing. Really, it's just using symbols in the front to here. We practice this, right, guys? The share screen, I mean. Let me know if you see this.
Yeah, we can see it.
So one of the issues that I had encountered is on a really large site, there are just so many different sections. And so I actually had to refactor some of these sections like many times. So at the first go around, I thought, okay, that looks like 4 different sections. And then as I build and as I get more information from the designer, I start to see the pattern, right? And based on that pattern, I can start to group them into similar. So this is really just to help me figure out if a component is a section, or if it's a card, or if it's a, this is a draft. Bear with me, everybody. And then the other piece that I feel like I have to organize a lot are the prop groups, because yeah, there's just a lot of props. I think I made a post about it. And then, yeah, I'm just really interested in how you guys are organizing your props as well.
Always
you want to share, Alessia?
Yeah, sure. So let me get the right. Mine is similar, but in a different. So this is actually the view-only link that hopefully is shared with you in the chat. Still work in progress, still ugly, as you can see. But if we go to here, I kind of divided all the different types of components into sections, layouts, and then the actual elements. So I guess none of these are really for the marketeers or for the clients, but more for developers. And what you can do is by using these existing components, which you actually show here, you can then wrap these and create sections that the client can use. Actually, let me zoom in. I don't know if you can see it properly. But basically what I'm leveraging is pretty much the class attribute that you can add on components. So it's more based on, let's say, atomic CSS. So we all know that Webflow class stacking is a big no-no in the usual Webflow style panel, or like the style selector up here. But what you can do, let me go and find an example here. I'm defining very small properties. So for example, here in this layout, I'm just trying out the gap between the two elements. So here, what I do, I group all my custom classes, and I've got several ones just targeting different divs inside of the component. And by the way, let me know if I'm completely losing you and you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But here, just by selecting or like inputting a class, I can define, in this case, the gap, but it could be also the number of columns, the size of these columns, the alignment of the elements inside of the grid. So it's, and I can stack all these classes. So I can, like you see here, I've got a small gap with the number of columns defined, and I want all the elements to align to the top. But this also means it's very different from the style selector, where if you want to change, let's say, the middle class, you have to remove all the ones afterwards, change that, and re-add all the other classes. In this way, you don't really have that problem, because you can just go in and say, actually, I only want 2 columns here, and you change the 3 to a 2, and it kind of changes without having to change all the other classes. So in my system, I'm kind of leveraging components as layouts with atomic CSS class entering, but obviously all these classes have to be defined beforehand. So yeah, I mean, I could change these to be like aligned to the bottom, or like I can do a combination of classes to define all kinds of layouts with just one component.
So Alessia, what's the workflow like where someone who's developing on this project would know you can plug in all these things under layout? Would they come to this page here in the project, or like how would you make it easier for them to comprehend what's going on?
So this view only is mainly for training my team or training other external like developers that they want to learn more about the system. For client projects, at the bottom, you kind of see kind of like a cheat sheet in a way with all the classes that have been created that you can add. And some of these exist in every single project, and some of these might be client specific. So one of our clients had a 7-column grid, which is not in here, but I've added it to their cheat sheet because it's available on their system. So these are kind of a base where you can start from, and then each client has its own, well, I like to call it cheat sheet, but it's basically a list of classes that they can enter.
How does the responsiveness work, Alessia, for the grids that you were showing, that 3-column grid that you had? Does it just flow automatically?
So the way that I structured the class naming, it's 2 ways. So for sizes, I tend to keep it small, medium, large, and then I might have tiny and huge on either side if needed. And then for desktop, tablet, and mobile, I have, like in the columns, you have 3 numbers, And the first one is the number of columns on desktop. The second one is for tablet, and the third one for mobile. And the great thing about this is that Webflow actually shows you. So for example, here I've got 3. So here I've got 3, 1, 1. So it's 3 on desktop. And then I've got 2 tablet. It's 1 column. And mobile, I'm actually defining mobile as the landscape mobile. But yeah, this is 1. If I change it to, here we go. So this one is, for example, a 4, 2, 1 columns. So it's 4 columns on desktop. And if I go to tablet, if I go and find it here, it's 2. And then it goes down to 1 column. So that's how I define the responsiveness. And I use this system also with Flexbox. So I have direction. I might have like horizontal on desktop, horizontal on tablet, and then vertical for mobile, or, vertical for tablet as well. So I use, I guess, these 2 like naming system. It's either 3 letters or 3 numbers for responsiveness, or the medium, large, medium, and small for sizes.
Interesting. I want to kind of point out, because people might not really realize that, like, you're stacking the classes just by leaving a space, right? Because I don't think there's any like, nobody's actually got any documentation about like that's how it works. So there's actually a space between these established classes in any of these kind of custom classes, and
no dot.
And no
so
dot,
you know,
right?
how in CSS you add a dot in front of each class. So there's no dot, and there's only a space separating them. No comma, no anything.
So we got some questions now. So Keith is interested to see how the class structure is set up within the component. Can you kind of show us that in the actual component? Just so that we can get an idea of like how there's, I guess, how they're stacking, and because different props, or, the class that you have for layout or spacing, it's on a different div or part of the component, right?
Yeah. So let me go at the very bottom, because you can't edit a component inside of a slot. So I've got like a little white, like in the sea of green, there's a little white section here where I can actually change my components. So I've got my layout grid here. So if I double click into it, this is only, well, a slot by itself cannot be a component. So you have to wrap it inside of a div, right? So I thought, all of a sudden you have 2 divs, one which is the slot and one which is the wrapping div. So if you go to settings, and let me try and zoom in a little bit more. So I have kind of what I call the spacing class tied to this wrapping div. So I can add padding or margin or like max width or anything, and it will not affect the layout itself, but this div wrapping it. And then my slot here, if you go to the style, this has like a layout grid, and by default it only has 1 column, so it actually just acts like nothing is happening. And then in the settings, this is tied to my layout class. I don't know if that answers the question.
Does that clear things up, Keith? It does. Okay, excellent. And then Ananya, are clients supposed to add the class, or is this developer oriented?
That's where the discussion starts, because I mainly come up with a system for myself, to build sites. So it's more developer oriented because the developer enters the class, the developer defines the class. So if I actually open up here my page, inside here I've got my custom classes, which are actually divided by the type of classes that these are. So the layout ones will all be inside of the layout, which are all defined in here. And so I'm expecting this to be developer first, where you're creating these components, you're adding the classes needed to create all the variations of these components. So to answer her question is, yeah, developer first. But I also have maybe more technical clients, the types of clients who are very at ease to be inside of the designer, but they might not necessarily have developer knowledge of knowing what's like best practices. And as long as they have that cheat sheet, or like as long as they have all the classes available, they're very happy to enter classes themselves. And we try to have class naming which kind of makes sense and they're not super abstract.
Okay, and Patrick has a long question here. Curious to hear the thoughts from the panel. It's sounding like consensus around the class system in Webflow feels like there's maybe too many guardrails, specifically around being able to edit the last class with more complicated component builds, requiring class overrides. Do you feel like there's not enough guardrails there sometimes, like we're jumping from one extreme to another?
I'm not sure I completely understand the question. Sorry.
I don't know. Maybe we could. Patrick, you're here. Do you want to chime in and maybe clarify a bit?
Hal, Kenneth, if you have anything to add as well, I don't want to be the only one talking.
I think we give our clients pretty good guardrails. I can share my screen and show you sort of how we're approaching it. And we've done some more recent projects where honestly, like our design systems and options are even more epic than this. Slot. Let's see if you had like a first section, try to break up things into these different groups. So here, the eyebrow's hidden, but we can, why is it not showing? Maybe for general. So we can show a headline here. And then here we go to eyebrow, and then we can show the eyebrow here. So we try to break it up as far as guardrails so the clients can come in. And then here, for like the way you're doing columns here, we just like have one attribute or one property just for the column grid like this. And so as far as your question about having enough guardrails, I feel like for every project, it's a little different and we sort of build it up to them, but there's some like underlying trends that we see in the system that we're building. And I feel like if you're not careful, it can become very blocky. No pun intended there with these components. And so I think it's important to sometimes add a little thing here, like up here, if we go to our general section here to the heading, where would this be? Under description. See, that's why it gets challenging. We need to combine some of these here. But for sometimes we'll have, different things that like blurs or different colors. I guess one last thing here for like colors and styles. If we look at the general tab, we can change this from like gray to white to dark. Oh, this one's not working for dark, but so I think that's part of the challenge too, where just you have to really think step through step and pressure test them to make sure before you give it to the client. In this case, it worked out okay because they're not using the dark mode, but yeah. So I think closing up, Patrick, I feel like the properties here, we sort of set the guardrails for them. But then, yeah, if they want to do something crazy, they have to go back into the components and update it across the board. Kenneth, did you do anything like this?
Yeah, I think I really wish I can share the project that I'm working on too. I should have prepped better. Sorry, everyone. I think I'm really hoping Webflow is going to launch some sort of variant to components soon, because I think that would be part of the guardrails. I think a lot of us are doing these custom code because we don't have that option right now. So for me, I am currently a big believer of Lumos, and the theme function of the Lumos extension has been kind of like my bridge gap while I wait for variants. Actually, Alessia, I think your framework would fit very nicely to his extension. You guys should connect. But I'm really doing the same thing. So the one piece of thing I'm thinking as you're talking is we have components that we use to build, kind of like to Alessia's point. But when you make a client friendly component, let's say it's a section, that's generally based on the layout of design on Figma. So that is, I think as a developer, we have to make the decision, like, how much flexibility do we want to give to clients? Do we want to give them the option of changing it from 2 columns to 3 columns to however many columns? Because then now it's almost like you're giving them a dumbed down version of Webflow. Alternatively, the other way is you will give them your 2-column options, your 3-column options, and your 4-column options. And really the control they have there is maybe over color, over content, over image versus video, and things like that. And I think that's kind of going back to our initial point is, as the developer, we're no longer only just doing the work. I think a big part of this, I think if there's a common message we're kind of sending here, is there's an opportunity here for us to understand the client, how they work, how their marketing team work, how technical they are. And based on that knowledge, you design that component to fit them. If they're more technical, just give them Alessia's framework and off they go. But I think we all know most marketing team are not technical at all. And I think maybe they need that, a little bit of flexibility in design, but not like, an infinite amount of options. So I think that's kind of why it's kind of hard for us to answer this question as well, because Guardrail changes from client to client. But I think that's why we're having this discussion here.
And I guess certain guardrails, it's defined by you, Kenneth, right? And not necessarily Webflow. I mean, Webflow does have some maybe limitations at the moment with not having variants of components. But then those guardrails are kind of defined by you of what the client can and cannot do to an extent, right?
Yeah.
And I think variants are going to play out. I think if they do a great job, it's going to enable like massive numbers of Webflow developers to be doing kind of what we're doing here with code. But if Webflow kind of launches something that's half-baked, it's going to be very disappointing. And I think eventually they'll get there, and we just are all hoping that it happens sooner versus later.
For sure.
Well, we're running into the first roadblock with the components too, also, is because they seem to have been built for enterprise things that are like within one workspace. So like if you move, like say you have, and I'm not sure people know this, but like say you're working in Lumos or Mast or whatever framework you're using, and if you like build components in that, and then you basically unhook it to transfer it to a client or something like that, and you're not building it in their workspace, you can get duplication happening of a whole bunch of props or something like that, and having to delete a bunch of, or not props, rather variables. And there's, some issues with it being built in, designed for one workspace. How are you getting around that?
I guess you mean the libraries.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. So I guess we've got components, and we've got shared libraries that components kind of fit into, right? And probably I'm not explaining it well. But you can now use a shared library within one workspace. So you can create this component library and you can share it in, but if you're building it based on like a particular framework or something like that, that already has variables established and everything else like that, if you unhook it, regardless of whether you want those variables to transfer over to your, when you unhook a library, the variables basically get transferred to your project regardless. So if you have it like in a framework already and you're putting it into like a new project with a framework, it will duplicate the variables.
Yeah, I'm just not sold on. I mean, we have some clients where they have multiple projects in a workspace, but I think there's companies that need that, but I think most projects we do, we're really building on one project. And then also, at least when the shared library is launched, there's a lot of types of like elements. If it was in a component, you couldn't share it with another one. And so I know they were going to eventually improve that, but I just haven't even looked at it since, because I'm trying to share a library. It's like, oh, you have 4 components that have like Lottie files or things that you can't share. So I'm just like, all right, I'm just going to table this one. But yeah, Jeremy, I don't, as far as if you are sharing them and there's a duplication problems, I mean, hopefully you're using the same framework across all the projects, but I think that might have just been an oversight. And is there any solution, Alessia, you know about that one?
I mean, I've seen on Twitter discussions about it. I haven't experienced it myself. I guess similar to your note of, I think we only have one client who would benefit from it because they have multiple sites that use kind of the same design system. So it would be great. But at the same time, I guess it's one of those features where Webflow build it with the client, those types of clients in mind. It's like, okay, one client has multiple sites, they all share the same design system. So if you could share those components within the workspace, that would be ideal. I think what people have taken it to the extreme. So they're like, oh, I'm gonna build a whole like Luma's or mass component system, and I'm going to share it with the whole world and like across workspaces. And then maybe that's when you unlink and relink, and then maybe those problems. Jeremy, I haven't been able to replicate that issue, so I have no idea. But maybe that's also what's also happening, and it might be that, you know, the feature of libraries wasn't explained from like by Webflow as well as it should have. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things, because it depends on how people work, right? Like, I guess some agencies, if they're working in a client's workspace, it's different than if they're working their own space and transferring at the end. You don't want to find out at the end of the project, when you're transferring everything, that you have a massive amount of duplication because of this issue, right?
Yeah.
I think that's really what to be aware of is like, and to your point, like we've kind of talked about a little bit, is like, it almost makes sense, like your components are agnostic to whatever your or independent of your framework in a way, right? Like or you're building these custom things for only your company. So for me, as somebody who is coming in as a developer, and there's lots of us just Webflow developers out there that come and, you know, work with other agencies, and we want to level up to like work on enterprise projects and stuff within, you know, an agency or something like that, as somebody that can do this kind of work. It's interesting because there's so many different frameworks out there that we, you know, have to be familiar with, or like if you want to work on different stuff at a certain level. And then on top of that, trying to be like move components in and out, like I think that's where personally, that's where I was like, okay, I started building something in Mast, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to take these components and move them over to, you know, I just want to do all this work that I've done with props and everything else, because that's the cool thing about shared libraries, is props are transferable, which is, props take a long time, as you all have, you know, shown. Kenneth, you have your like long thing, and we can have the discussion about like, you know, how the props and folders and everything else like that. But designing that takes a long time. And so when we're talking about designing these systems, are you really just more concerned about like, for your agency, we're going to design this system for us and we're going to use it? Like, and then so people have to adopt whatever that is, your system, or is there any kind of shared mentality about how we're, you know, collectively going to deal with this?
That's a great question. Sorry, go ahead, Alessia.
No, you go first.
I would just say, maybe this sounds selfish, but I think I haven't really given that much thought, just because I think my approach with my client is like, I believe my job is to bring them value. first and foremost. So really that's understanding their problem, what are they trying to do, what resources they have after I'm done with the website. That's a big part of my discovery with my client. Is I always kind of joke, like, if I get hit by a bus, who are you going to go to, right? So I think I see components, coming back to the topic, is a way of really enabling us to leave the site with the client in a way that they can actually manage and handle, where previously they really need a Webflow developer if they were to make any sort of large scale build or addition to the site. And so I haven't given too much thought about, like, if they go to another developer, are they going to figure out? I guess if I have to answer that question right now, I would just expect that whoever would have picked it up would understand it, I guess. Maybe it's not a framework that they recognize per se, but they can double click in my components and figure out what I was doing.
Yeah, we build clients a lot for like training and onboarding and documentation. And I think part of this, like, it's crazy. Like, we're selling a project right now, and like maybe 15% of the project budget is towards building components, like doing the actual dev work of building the components. So much of the rest of it is strategy, design system, training, documentation. And it's kind of crazy looking at it that way. But I think, Kenneth, yeah, as far as, I'm warning all the clients too, like, hey, if we build this, there's aren't going to be that many people who are available. And for a lot of clients, like, we make a lot of money on these one-off projects. Well, we charge a lot. I don't know if we actually make a lot, but I think I tell them, like, hey, like, if you sign and work with us, like, we can help you hire a freelancer or recruit a freelancer that's going to be more cost effective, or you can have us on retainer. Like, I don't really mind, but for us, it just helps to have the opportunity to do this project. But I think, Kenneth, you're totally right. It's still early in components for us to know actually, like, how clients maintain them after we build them. And I think it's good for us just to give them a heads up of sort of what they can do if they weren't going to work with us to edit them or build new ones.
Yeah, and I guess if you want to share, like, if, let's say, you have a wider library, or not a wider library, but like a more basic foundation of, like, the components, because I find a lot of components are very specific to the client. There's only a handful of ones that apply to all of them, probably like a button, a link, a card, an article card. That's pretty much it in terms of all the components which are actually shared across projects. And then the rest of them are very specific to the client. So if you do want, like, my plan for what I'm building now is to just create a clonable. So it's not a library. It's not something that you can, I guess, plug into other ones, but it's just the foundation that you can duplicate and then build from there. And then the rest is going to be specific to the client and different for each one of them.
So the setup is more like, this is your clonable that you kind of start with, just like as if you were starting with any framework. And this is like the start of the project kind of idea with it, right? As if you were either starting with Master Client first, Lumos, or whatever. This is the thing. Yeah, it's interesting because I find that what we kind of seem to be talking about is, like, there's almost like this setup for the initial, like, base kind of level of components that are transferable or whatnot. And then there's also, then it becomes like, then this is the components built for this project, for this client, for their particular needs. But it would be handy to have kind of that base start of something that is transferable, right? Where it's like, you can be like, whether it be because to your point, so for a shared library, let's say you could turn that clonable into a shared library within your project. The issue then becomes transferring it out, right? So, like, as far as that's kind of I guess that's the little bit of difficulty that we have right now. And I think that is because, to, I think, Corey's point in the chat, is they really was designed for marketing teams and almost an in-house thing. So there wasn't really thought, I don't think, much about transferring it out of a project.
Yeah. And actually, I think what's suggested is to have, like, if you have two websites that use that shared library, the library, actually a third site where all your components, or like the original components live, and the other two live sites pull the components from that kind of external third component only site. So I think that's how it was originally thought out by Webflow, being, yes, very client-based, very like company one workspace oriented, versus sharing library, more like Figma, where you can create a library and share it across all projects. Yeah.
Whoever can simplify the most will win, because this is very sophisticated, and I think we're all racing to find out. Like, I respect Lumos a lot, but I just can't build a business with developers on a system that's that sophisticated with components, and maybe people get sped up to it, but just this whole conversation, what I'm just hearing is like, okay, how can we simplify this for our team so that we can use it, hire new developers and train them on it, and train our clients on it too. And I think we've not unlocked that yet, but we're definitely working on it, and it's very encouraging.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ideas that I do like about Lumos, and shout out again for Timothy Ricks, because he's very thought-provoking and he comes up with so many ideas. And yeah, I really like, I mean, hopefully Webflow will fix this soon, but the overwrites of variables, that's something that I started using. So you set, so we use Clamp for all of our text sizes, just to get fluid text or like copy. And so like setting all your variables to 0 and then overwriting them on custom code. I think that's something that Timothy always spoke about, which we currently use. So, but I kind of agree with you how, like, I've never fully embraced Lumos just because of its complexity. So yeah, I think simplicity is key. And whoever gets there first, we'll see. Or maybe we should just brainstorm all together and come up with the ultimate solution across all of it. You know?
Yes.
Yeah, I think because I think in some ways, like, we always are kind of looking for something that's a bit universal, right? Like, we have to, like, some sort of, as we develop anything, it's like there's some sort of standard that, so that people can understand and be able to figure out what we're doing. And I guess you usually have people coming in with different ideas and stuff like that. Like, when we're talking about even the way that components work, and the discussion about slots, and like some people are like pro slot, and some people are like no slots. And like, or you know, with components, what's really cool about components though is, like, you can build this component and then you can easily duplicate it and you know, change something about it by naming it to something else, right? It becomes another component. And I guess that's part of that idea with that. Patrick has a good question here. Question for the panel: has anyone created any JavaScript heavy components, or components thinking like animations maybe? Are you creating custom code blocks and keeping them in the components? What about loading libraries that would typically go into the head tags? Are you loading those libraries like per page, every page? Anybody even touch that stuff yet?
I mean, Swiper.js, I use that pretty much on every single project, and that's a component for me. So it's actually two types of components. One is more modular and one is more defined. So there's the one, let's say, section, and it has a slider with, let's say, if you're an agency, all of your projects. Let's just use it as an example. It's not something that you touch often, so it stays as it is. But one client I had, they used quite often like sliders, and they had different maybe slides depending on where you're using in the page. So I actually created a component with slots, which would be the swiper wrapper with a slot, and then they would add all their slides into it, and the JavaScript would be just inside of the component, so they didn't have to touch any of it. They just had to add however many slides into the slot, and it would just work. So I find, yeah, you could use slots in very
I can show
clever
an
ways.
example of that here. So like, here's an FAQ, one opens, the other closes. And here we just have this fact section. We have slots, and we can come in here and just copy and paste and add more of these if we want. But the JavaScript's able to intelligently know what's being used here. So I think, yeah, we're using it for here. And yeah, for slide decks also, we found it useful. So
That's a great example of the FAQ. Yeah, another one, it was the like a modal trigger or like pop-up. So whatever you drop, like I have a component that's called like modal trigger, and it has 2 slots, one for the static element that you want the trigger, like that you want to click, and the other one is the modal. So you could basically switch things out, and you can have 3 different modal designs, and then pretty much infinite triggers that you want to add. And if you just like drop them in, you could make any component, I guess, become clickable, and it opens up a pop-up.
I think for people who are still confused about slots, someone needs to make a meme like that the moment you realize how slots actually work and why they're valuable. The reason why slots are great is because before we'd have to have properties for question 1, answer, question 2, question. But if you use slots, in every slot you just have the properties just for that one slot. And so it just lets you not have to have all these crazy properties on the right side. And so that's when I realized why we should try to use slots, even though there are limitations and challenges, and you can't like have preset slots in a component. So for page build mode, if you're using slots, it's going to make it a lot more complicated.
That's all we need next. We need pre-filled slots. Hopefully that's it. Yeah, because that's exactly what I ran into. Same case, FAQ. You load it onto another page. Let's say you have 3 pages with the same FAQ sections with the same questions. But then there's a 4th page that has its own FAQ questions. Now you're in a bit of a pickle because there are no pre-filled slots, to your point. But Patrick, I think oh, sorry.
You go.
No, I was just gonna say, just like CSS, for example, like a marquee, just like Alessia, I would put my custom code into the component if it makes sense. Like if that code is specific to that component, then I'll leave it in the component. Otherwise, it'll be page or site wide.
Interesting. Yeah. I guess this ties into a little bit about like the limitations. And as we get into like CMS, like that doesn't seem to be something that works so well right now.
Oh no, it's
no.
We have some creative solutions that we can share later, but we found some ways to navigate it. But yeah, that needs to get on the roadmap ASAP.
How much have you guys been doing? How much have you guys been doing CMS with components? Like have you guys play around with the mix of the two?
Yeah. We have like 3 methods of how we integrate CMS into components, and we advise clients like, hey, here's the ways we can do it. Which one do you want? We built up like a library internally so that we can advise there without having to spend a lot of time. But it took a lot of time up front to determine these methods, and we kind of make them choose what they like so that they don't come to us 6 months later saying, "What's wrong with you? Why'd you do this to me?"
Yeah, I guess the method I've been using was the duplication of components. Like that's almost like one of the ways, because the one of the main issues I think that people may not be aware of is that when you're using components and you try to use it with CMS, the filters and things that you would normally be able to use to like decide like even just a simple selector or something like that, being like, I have all these FAQs, but then I also have a reference field to which FAQ it is.
Yep.
You cannot use the filtering in like Webflow with that, and so you end up, at least what I've ended up doing with the modals and with FAQs, is literally creating a component that is this type of component for this. So it can still be used throughout the site when I'm using that content in it, but it's specific to that content, CMS content.
Yeah,
Jeremy, what
and
we've done is
different. Sorry, Hal.
we just set up
Well,
a separate.
super quick, like the same as you, Jeremy. So if I have, going back to that FAQ, or maybe FAQs have categories, and you have one page that has all of them, and then different pages with different categories, I find, and that's why I'm interested in Hal's system, is that you create different components with all the different filters applied to them. And so you end up having, I don't know, 3 different FAQs depending on which filters they have. So how, like,
we can we're right now selling a project where if we'll give them a huge discount to let us just like document everything we've done. So fingers crossed that goes through. We create a separate reference field for like the FAQs, and then we assign like FAQ 1, and then we assign the ones you want to assign, and then we're able to use that to like filter on each page. And that's the method. But the issue with doing that is you can't control the sort order, but it does allow a way to filter that they can go into the CMS and filter which ones they want and assign that per component per page. But sometimes
Can you share? I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm getting it, and maybe other people are not. Is there any way to share what you're talking about?
I will get permission from a client and share a Loom video with you afterwards, going through the
Okay.
process. Is that cool?
Yeah, that'd be great.
add me to the list. I want to see it too.
Yeah.
It's in the ACE. We have the Loom in the ACE channel, but I'll get permission to share it publicly.
Yeah, but hopefully
Excellent.
Webflow will add that feature soon. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I guess is there, what other limitations are we running into? I know it's just, I want to be mindful of everybody's time. We are at an hour now, and we usually are done here. Is everybody able to stick around a bit longer and still chat, or should we wrap this up? Okay, we're good to continue then. Excellent. Yeah, so I'd love to talk about what other limitations you're running into with them and how you're getting around them.
Let's first just repeat, Kenneth and Alessia, like the limitations we've discussed already today for that foundation. So would you all sound off what we've discussed already?
Sorry.
Let's just first repeat like the foundation of all the limitations we've hit, and then build on top of that.
Right. So, CMS that we just mentioned.
No
There's
pre-fill slots.
No pre-filled
Pre-fill
slots.
slots. Yep.
Component modes, like variable modes.
Yes.
So those are like the big 3, I would say.
Yeah.
There is one other one that I hit the other day. When you're pulling background colors from the CMS, I guess it's also like CMS limitation, but slightly different, where you're pulling, color or border color, those kind of things. You can't do that to a component, so you have to unlink it, and then you have to bring it up a level to be able to pull those properties over, which I guess it's linked to the CMS limitation as well. Another thing that you can't really do with components, I think, is again in CMS you can target the even and odds children. So with components you can't really. It's harder to do that, I'd say.
With code, you have to use some code for that.
Yeah,
also
which is
variables, having fully responsive variables. We have to write code to sort of address that challenge. I'm optimistic it will come.
And I guess we have empty slots being rendered in the DOM. I guess that can be a thing, but we can also take care of that with visibility. Or does that work?
Visibility could not render that.
Yeah.
And I guess that's because slots are divs. So if you have a grid where you have some content and then a slot, that slot still counts as a div. So if you have like a gap value even if the slot is empty, that will still show because there's still something there, which is the div of the slot. But visibility takes it away. So we can address that way.
Are we adding a lot of visibility to everything? Like, is that a prop that we're using on a lot of elements now?
Oh yeah. I
Yeah.
have a whole group of props just for, I call it element control. So if you imagine a card that has a cover image, a logo, a badge, a heading, an eyebrow, like all the stuff that you can possibly fit in a card, then you need visibility for each one of them. So this is where the variant would be really good. So I've been using Lumos for that. I know we were a couple of Lumos earlier. So instead of doing that, there'll be hopefully what will be variants. So if you can imagine one card on a particular site, there may be 3 versions of it, right? Currently, you have to on and off each element individually to create those 3 versions. But with variants, what you're hoping to do is you'll create one card and 3 variants, very similar again to Figma. And I personally believe Webflow is really following Figma's journey. So that's why I'm personally expecting variants and also the other things that we were talking about earlier. I couldn't remember, but yeah, so that's kind of the idea. But right now, yeah, I have cards that have like 12 visibility controls. So I have to scroll way down just to find other stuff. Yeah, it's a problem.
Yeah, I think just making the properties easier to navigate and digest and document. And look, they're working like for the components like previews. Now you can organize them and group them, which is exciting. And I think like a big thing we didn't mention is like putting static elements inside of a slot. Instead of only right now you can only put a component inside of a slot. But if we can go into a slot and do anything we want, then we can start doing backflips.
Oh, and another
Right,
thing,
because that's a big limitation, right? Is only being able to use a component in a slot. Like that's, you can't put static stuff in. That's a good thing to note, people.
so even if you want to add just an image or just a line of text, that image has to be a component to be able to drop it inside of the slot.
Yeah, and if you think about the new page building mode coming up, like I'm very interested to see how quickly they're going to allow this. Because if you imagine a client trying to build a page, actually, there's something I'm running into right now. Like to train them to build a page, you would imagine there'll be a page slot inside just a page main wrap, maybe, and then you're letting them go to town using sections, right? But then what if there's all of a sudden they need a static element? They would have nowhere to go. And to Alessia's point, we're going to have to turn that into a component just for a single line of text. Which
they have to call you, Kenneth. They're like, Kenneth,
they gotta write you a big
create.
That's what we're talking about. Making that money.
And so yeah, we're doing this project. We spent 80 hours. We're just rebuilding their site on Webflow in this component-based way. We spent 80 hours just downloading their site using HTML to Figma plugin. You haven't heard of it? It's incredible. So we download all their pages. We spent 80 hours like identifying all the sections, all the components, like all the levels, and we have like maybe 60 different. We have like the developer first approach where we have slots and you can build and create your own thing. And there's slots, and we also have like maybe 50 different for build mode of like no slots, like here you go sections. And we have a library we're designing in Figma where the marketer can go in, copy paste them using auto layout, build it in Figma. And then every component has a name. So it's like features 8, like hero 3. And so we're going to build, and we've never done anything this large before, but, we'll see how big that components, but ideally using Figma as like the source of truth for all your components, organizing it there to let marketers not Reloom, is that what it's called? Reloom, yes. Kind of like how Reloom has their library. Like we're going to be creating things like that for them. And I think before we're talking about, is this for developers or for marketers? I think ultimately we can build components for developers to do more advanced things or like technical marketers. And we can also build components for 5-year-olds that just go like, drag and this and that.
Yeah. And you can always wrap you can always have components within components, right? So you can have the developer-oriented components to build the section, and then you can wrap that section, create that as a component for the marketers, and then they can use it a lot simplified way of the section.
Yeah, you can like unlink certain, like for example, let's say in your button you have a prop for the size, a prop for the color, a prop for the text. When you wrap that, you don't have to bring all those up to the top level, right? So you can say I'm only allowing the text because I don't want the client to all of a sudden change the color of that button. So it's that stacking that I found to be very, very powerful. But I think it's also worth really mentioning, if we can stress that again, is there's a huge opportunity. We're all doing this as a business. I think that I truly believe there's a lot of value here that we can bring that can translate into revenue and income if you're doing this. And so it's truly worth spending the time to understanding that, because same as you, Hal, like helping the client reverse engineering that site design. So we started off with a full site design in Figma, many frames, and that action of reverse engineering kind of like a design system for them, they're paying for. And I can only imagine how many clients are out there. But first, we have to educate them. We have to educate them on the value of a design system, which translate into components, which translate into enabling the marketing team to build their own page. So if the client can see that journey, I think they will be more willing to open their wallets, and ultimately, that's what we want them to do, right?
The core, we've been working for 2.5 months at Candidleap. Literally 5 people in the company together working on this course, and it's just the part is how can you hire a designer, give them this course, they can do the design system for you if you don't have that in-house expertise. Because I think if you're so you need to have someone with the expertise to set you up as the developer for success. Am I cutting out?
Yeah, you were a bit. So we kind of missed a bit of that. But you were saying something about how you can find the designer or developer for the expertise. Is that what?
I think there's very few web designers out there who actually know web design systems in this way that's needed. So we're trying to build a resource, because we've done this maybe on 4 or 5 projects now. This kind of trial and error of hey, if you hire a designer, you can give them this. It's not going to be a paid course. It's just going to be a resource out there. You can give them this resources. Here's our templates. Here's our gotchas. And you can have someone work with you as a Webflow development professional, because I feel there's just such a gap that it just takes so many mistakes and years and experiences to be able to get to that point to really guide someone from, design system to design, wireframes, development to training. And so, but I feel like the direction we're going is I'm less of a Webflow development shop, but more of a consultant of hey, you have this big Salesforce software that is so complicated and you need to have an external advisor, and that we're coming in and our business is more around. And there's only certain, so many companies on Webflow don't need that. They don't want that. But I think for the bigger, better companies that are considering Webflow, it's selling that's really exciting. And I think Webflow can outcompete headless right now, super hardcore. Maybe 2 years it might change, but for right now, Webflow's product is just so awesome. So it's a great time to be alive.
Well, that's the thing. I think where they're heading into, I've had this discussion with other people about AEM or other headless systems or something like that, or what's the other one? There's a few, and they cost a huge amount of money to these companies, and then these companies also are limited by the component. They can you can use 20 components and that's it, and then it costs this much to use that and whatnot, and they're not as custom. Whereas the opportunity here is to build these very customized components for a client that they can just take and run with, that are specific to their particular brand, to their particular needs, which is something super cool to be able to provide, with the design system and everything else, right? So I guess the question comes back, how does somebody get into this? I'm always because you start looking at the how big the components and slots and everything else is. How would you encourage somebody who hasn't even touched this and maybe tuning in to be okay, where do you start? What is that place? Any thoughts?
Go and check out Hal's resource for design systems.
We're building it. We're building it. I don't think there is a place to start, which is why we're in. And we have literally 5 different experts in our company across design, development, JavaScript design systems, building this together. And like from the beginning, all the projects we've done have been design development. And so I'm really excited. And yeah, if you want to get in like our early group, JP, you might know JP. He's really helping to lead this project. And yeah, do you kind of, Alessia, do you know any other resources to really, without like working in an agency or like crying for 5 years, disappointing clients, like to learn this kind of thing? Not disappointing clients, disappointing yourself. The clients don't know what they're missing, but you know what they're missing.
I mean, you're right. I don't know, like top of my head, I wouldn't know many resources around design systems. There might be some courses out there that design system designers
All the
have
courses
built.
for product is Alessia. There's like, I've never been able to find any like web marketing site, web design system content out there.
Well, we'll just need to create some. Well, you're already creating it.
We're working on it.
But yeah, hopefully, I mean, I've kind of stopped making videos, but I want to get back into it. So if that's a topic of interest, like I'll add it to the list, and I'll try to create some short videos around design system and components and slots. But yeah, I mean, the plan is to get kind of this, let's call it framework, or like group of like framework of components, I don't even know how to call it, blocks, to a state where it can be shared, and it could be a resource not only to use the framework, but the whole idea is to kind of educate of what you can do with components and slots. So kind of going through, you know, what structure the page has and what does that mean, and like the HTML tags that you should be using for the different components. Sort of that, more than just saying, hey, here's a clonable, clone it and then build on top of it. It's more based on, okay, these are the fundamentals of web design and this is how I should be structured. So that's kind of the idea of it. It's very early stage, as you can see, but hopefully we'll get there soon.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure. Sorry, Kenneth. That's missing from like the Webflow University, right? Like this particular aspect of things is definitely not something that they've got covered yet.
Yeah, I mean, they cover most of the functionality of Webflow, right? But the web basics, I mean, I think they started creating more modules on Webflow University around those, but it's definitely a broad subject to which doesn't just cover Webflow, but covers the whole of the web and how we build. So interesting.
Yeah, here's the outline for the course that we're building. So there's like an intro just about components, then the Figma work. And, you know, this will be a V1, like our plan here. Hopefully not sharing something I'm not supposed to share. But like, you're supposed to do a V1 for 10 selected people, just like Loom videos, get feedback, do a V2. Get like more people, improve it, and then plan for like a bigger launch in English and Spanish. So like right now we're working on the V1, and we're sold this project that, you know, if it's an enterprise project, and that we'll discount heavily if they can let us like use that project as like the course of like how we go from start to finish. So I'm really optimistic. It's the CAD client. So I'm optimistic that the CEO will approve our bribe. And then we break down Webflow components of like, hey, junior, like medium and senior level. And like if you're a lead, like how to think sort of like at these 4 levels. And so, yeah, I would love anyone here, like, you know, the issue is, you know, if we sell these projects, then we don't have as much free time to work on the course, but it's a huge priority. And hopefully I just have money I can throw at this. And yeah, if anyone's interested, we'd love to get some feedback early on this first round.
Yeah, definitely. I'm
And
sure there's people that will take up on that. Are we missing anything? Did we cover all the stuff that we said we should cover? I don't know if we've anything sticking out in your mind of anything that we at this point we've, you know, not talked about.
I mean, I've got one topic. I don't know how long we have, but there's like, while I was experimenting with components and looking at all the different frameworks, and how people input classes or attributes to change the look of components. Like there's two ways of doing this. One is by using the data attribute and one is the class attribute. And I wanted to open up the question to Kenneth and Hal, like do you use both? Do you have one that you prefer, or how do you structure your classes or like inputs to like theme?
My answer is easy, just because I'm using Lumos right now, so I'm much more heavier on data attributes. I do use some class attributes, but mostly data.
We use a lot of class attributes. We use both. And the thing is, like, I was a marketer. Like, I know how to do Webflow. Like, I did some design school, but like the way I run my business, I'm more like a market sales strategy person. And so, like, I can get technical, but I think, Alessia, like, to be honest, like, I don't have the full answer to your question. And I think that's the issue with these design systems and components, is that like it takes so many levels of knowledge of that not one person's going to uniquely have, that like it's hard to find someone who can really speak to all of them. So I know we use both depending on the use case. But also I think I'm just going to like practice humility and say, like, I'm not totally sure what we're leaning towards more.
Well, data attributes requires, like, that's more of a code-based solution at this point, right? Like that's the as far as like if we're because I think when we talk about Webflow, sometimes we have to break it down and be like, okay, this is a much more code heavy solution, and so there's a lot more custom CSS and different things that are required. And whereas like with some things, it's like you can turn around and actually make that more class based too, right? Like that's even with styles, like even with like custom attribute styles or something like that, it becomes like, do I make this a class or do I leave this as a style, because it's like size and they can just fit in like their view height or whatever for a section or something like that. Is that easier than having this many different types of classes for this is the size of thing? And it's an interesting discussion about that, where I guess it depends, really, doesn't it?
It depends. Here's the invoice. Thank you.
Excellent. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. We're almost at 90 minutes with this. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Hal, Kenneth, and Alessia, for helping us walk through this. And like really just, it feels like we're just having the beginning discussions about where this is actually going, because we don't really we wanted to have this discussion because the conference, Webflow Conf, is coming up, and we're hoping that this is going to be a big part of what they're doing with everything, because they seem to be pushing everything into this. And so it's good for people to be aware that it's out there, and it is a complex kind of thing where it's like, I don't think anybody has all the answers yet. We don't know what the best practice is or stuff, but you all are kind of on the cutting edge of this, which is why we invite you to come speak, right? Is just because you've been playing around with it and you've been like experimenting with it, and I think that's where we're at. Mm-hmm. I don't know that we're that much further along with it.
For sure. Yeah, and I recommend for everyone to experiment and share your thoughts, because I feel like, I know I've spoken to both Kenneth and Hal in Toronto, and we were just like talking about different ways of structuring components and things like that. So the more we share ideas, the more other ideas gets triggered, and maybe the simplest solution, like Hal mentioned, might slowly bubble up, and then we can all benefit from it.
We are all stealing from each other, to be clear. Not one, yeah. Like we are all learning together. This is not like this is my framework, you know what I mean? Like it's a remix on everyone else's. And
that's why I'm like, I've shared my view only just so that other people can comment on it and say, oh, you're doing this way, that's a stupid idea, why don't you do it this way? Like, or the other way around, I don't know, but it's all about sharing and contributing to each other and giving each other feedback. And grow together.
Right.
Excellent.
All right. So, hi, little voice in the back here. Thank you again to all of you for that really interesting discussion. And I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be coming back and watching the video a lot, because there's a lot here to dig into and understand. I just want to remind everybody of things that are coming up here at Nocode North in the next few weeks. Next week is our interview on the Northern Showcase with Vancouver-based Nancy Peng. 2 weeks from today, on October 4th, we're going to be having a panel discussion on SEO and sort of the latest things that have changed with Google and where SEO sort of sits now, especially with things like without cookies and various other things that are coming down the line, what folks are thinking. And we have 3 fascinating people who are all experts at SEO joining us. Search historian Shane Veldhuizen from Arrival Creative, and Alex Lathery from Blue Collar Build. So I think they've all got a different perspective, but share that knowledge. And then on October 11th, Marcel Dielan is going to show us his small, medium, large framework. We're all interested in learning yet another framework, another way of looking at things. On October 15th, we are going to be having a Toronto Webflow Conf watch party for those who aren't able to go to a live event. So make sure you've signed up for that. Check out our website for more details. No event for later that week on the 18th. And then on the 25th, we'll have a conversation about all the things we learned from Webflow Conf. And I'm sure there'll be lots of good discussion coming out of that. So thank you all very, very much for joining us for this panel discussion on components, and we'll see you all real soon.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks, Becky.